Friends, Dave Paulides, Canada Missing Project, and I'm here in the room with the infamous Huck L. Berry, and it is amazing to me how many people know who she is and what she's about. It is amazing. She's a good girl. Yeah, she's a good girl. She likes scratches. Yeah, scratches. Oh yeah, that's good, Dad. That's good. She will hang out with us as we go down and discuss a couple of missing persons cases here. And if you haven't watched Missing 411 National Parks, Washington State, watch it right now on Amazon. You can also watch American Sasquatch, Man, Myth, or Monster. Both of them have come out in the last 6 months, 7 months. I wish you would watch them. And what would happen is you'd have a better understanding of really what we're doing around here. And you can watch my other 3 movies, Missing 411, Missing 411 The Hunted, Missing 411 The UFO Connection. Watch them for free on Tubi, T-U-B-I. Yes, Tubi. And our website, missing411.com. So I'm recently back from doing a couple of different interviews. And I'll get more into that later. Yes, I did Joe Rogan's, the Joe Rogan Experience. You can go over to his site, just Google YouTube, the Joe Rogan Experience. Scroll down, you'll see my interview there. And then I also just did the Y Files podcast. That will come up in another week or so. And AJ, the host, super good guy. Super good guy. We'll talk more about that in a little bit later. But got 2 cases to talk to you about today. And they're both from Alaska. I told you I'll be talking about Alaska a little more and more as we get closer and closer to the cruise. Yes, we have a cruise leaving in September of this year to Alaska. And we're actually going to do some things a little different. We're going to arrive a little bit early and do a special release on something the day before the cruise leaves. And if you go to missing411.com, you'll get all the information about the cruise, and it'll tell you about all the excursions and things that we're offering. It'll be fun. Marty, the host of the cruise, and I've been working on it for a long time. It'll be good. The 2 cases I'm going to talk to you about today. Fascinating. First one involves a young man named Curt Weller, 27 years old. He went missing March 24th, 2001 at 2:30 in the morning. This is Curtis. And he was at a location called False Pass on the Unimak Island in Alaska. Only has a population of 400, 35 permanent residences. And the town's used as a refueling stop for ships going to Bristol Bay and Bering Sea fishing boats that want to stay out. It's kind of further down the Aleutian chain from where the Bering Sea fishing boats usually hang out. So you've watched Deadliest Catch, I know. So all of their boats go out of right here. And then False Pass is right here. So you can kind of see this is the Aleutian Islands. Excuse me. Yeah, Dutch Harbor, Alaska, where all the boats for Deadliest Catch go out of. Now Curtis, Alaskan boy, from the North Pole. Yeah, that's a city there. If you've never been there and you go to Alaska, you need to go. And He was working on a cod processing barge that was anchored at False Pass. Now, the people who work on this ship, hard-working souls. You work your butt off for a month, 2 months. And I mean, you work 12 to 18-hour days, no days off. That's all you do is work. And what you do is you build a pretty nice nest egg because you're working so many hours and you don't have any expenses. You get room and board, you get your food, and they don't want you focusing on anything other than work. Well, he'd normally work a 12-hour day or more. And one thing he did every day is that he'd call it every day, every other day. He'd call his mom, see how things were doing at home, make sure she was okay. A good young man. Really good young man. His mom was a woman named Karen Miller. Said that her son was caring, super hard worker, and was planning for his future. And she said that he was planning to work on the boat till the end of June and then move to Oregon and get married. So he had plans. And he was working for a company called Bering Pacific Seafoods. The COO was a man named Larry Cotter. He said that Curtis was a super hard-working man, and he had a future with his company if he wanted it, just because of his diligence and how well he got along with everybody. So the way it works is the barge is anchored or docked at False Pass, and the boats bring the cod to them from what they've caught, and rather than having to go all the way back to another location, they would process the cod right there. And they had people like Curtis that would work on processing the cod and get it packaged and ready for shipment. And then at the end of your day, you would walk about a quarter mile back to the bunkhouse where they had food and drink, etc., and a room for you. Doesn't sound that bad. So what happened is that he worked a Friday night shift, got off at about 2 a.m, made the quarter mile walk back to the bunkhouse, and there's a break room at the bunkhouse where everyone kind of hangs out, watches TV, eats. And everyone saw him come in, and he came in and he says, "Hey, where can I get a beer around here?" And people laugh, and everyone liked him. He was upbeat. People said he was in a really good mood. And he had about 8 hours off until he had to show back up for a shift at 10 a.m. the next morning. He was last seen walking down the hallway towards his room. Well, 10 a.m. the next day, he doesn't show up for a shift. Completely unheard of. Never happened. And what was going on is, again, nobody saw him go to the room. Nobody ever saw him come out of the room. So they sent somebody over to check on him. They check his room. He's not there. What they find is his checkbook sitting on his desk. $100 bill sitting next to the checkbook. Everything's in his room. All of his personal things, they're all there. Well, they call the public safety officer for the island, a man named Bob Schaefer. See, in Alaska, they always don't have a state trooper on all these little islands, but all these little communities have their own public safety officer that have been trained at the Alaska State Trooper facility. Well, he gets there. He enters the bunkhouse, starts talking to people. Talks to the people on the barge, talks to the people that saw him at 2:30 in the morning. And he feels like something mysterious has happened because they can't find Curtis. So he calls for the Alaska State Trooper to fly in to help with the investigation. And in the meantime, he puts together 20 people on the island and employees of the processing company to help search. They first searched the barge. Nothing. He's not there. It doesn't look like he ever went back after a shift. And then there were other boats that were docked. Nobody had seen him. Nothing unusual. Then they start searching the bunkhouse, the break room, and then they start searching the city. And as this is going on, there's a blizzard blowing 50-mile-an-hour winds, snowing. It's horrible conditions. Eventually, an Alaska State Trooper gets there within a day. Now, Curtis's mom said that he loved the outdoors, loved hunting and fishing. He had one brother that name was Dustin. Loved his family. Was just one of those guys that could work nonstop to build a little nest egg for himself and not get preoccupied with the social issues that may surround him. Sounds like perfect management material for that company. Well, searchers again interviewed people. They confirmed he left the break room at 2:30. Nobody hung around and looked down the corridor, but they all assumed he went to his room. Well, on March 25th, the Coast Guard cutter Acushnet arrived and started searching the waters off the harbor. There were some people that thought, well, maybe he left the bunkhouse and walked back to the harbor. Nobody knew why he would do that, but that was just something that was floated around. There was a trooper that arrived named Chris Thompson. He gave an interview, said Weller was in a good mood that night. Everyone said so. And then the trooper said, no one has a good explanation for Weller's disappearance. Everyone here has a high opinion of the guy. That was his quote. It's a mystery. A guy walks down the hall and then disappears. Now, for you, I want you to remember that this happened on an island. Yeah, an island. Unimak Island. Home to the Shishaldin volcano that rises 9,372 feet above sea level. It's the largest island on the Aleutian chain at about 1,571 miles. But False Pass is really the only community in that part of the island. Now, it has a big harbor and it has a gravel airstrip. That's how the trooper got there. But the night that Curtis disappeared, there was no air traffic leaving, nor was there any boats leaving that night, confirmed by the harbor master. Now, why is that important? Some people wanted to insinuate that Curtis left that island that night. Well, it seems pretty idiotic if he left his checkbook and his cash and all of his personal belongings. That doesn't make any sense. But something really mysterious happened here. Now, on Monday, March 26th, 50 searchers were gathered together by the state trooper, and they systematically searched the city and the bunkhouse one more time. They said that the weather had been horrific. It was still blowing at 50, snow, etc. Then on Thursday, March 29th, in the Homer newspaper, quote, worker in False Pass mysteriously disappeared after leaving a cod processing barge. Then it said that land, sea, and air searches produced nothing, no witnesses. He left the bunkhouse, break room, nothing. How can that happen? I know some of you may say, well, there was foul play involved. Except everybody in the bunkhouse, they need to get along, and there are witnesses out there that would have snitched somebody off. But there was no evidence of any crime. No blood splatter, no evidence of a fight. Maybe with certain people, there could have been. But Curtis wasn't that person. And the reason I picked this out is because it was an island, bad weather, no witnesses, point of separation. You get it. And then, boom, he's gone. And super nice person, super hard worker, liked by everyone. What can I say? The next case, also perplexing. Let me set this up. Again, for the last many months, I've been focusing my attention on just Alaska. And I've been absolutely stunned and blown away by the number of people that have disappeared on boats that sank, people that fell overboard on boats, people that got their boats swamped. The number of people that this has happened to is off the charts. Not normal at all. Alaska has more unusual deaths than I could ever believe. And I've read through hundreds of them already. Now, Curtis was working on the water on a barge. He disappeared on an island. And going back to what I just said, the number of deaths related to water in Alaska is freaking phenomenal. No witnesses, and he was never found. How could that be? Now, the next case involves a man named Brian Murray. Brian was 44 years old, missing August 27th, 2011, 10 years after Curtis disappeared. He was working as an assistant hunting guide, working in an area northeast of Dillingham, Alaska. Now, on Curtis's case, the Alaska State Trooper came from Dillingham. Now, Brian, he lived in Fairbanks, but as an assistant hunting guide, he could make good money. What his job was that day, August 27th, is he was moving hunters up and down a river, dropping them off at hunting camps that they had set up. Well, one of the camps was 2 hours upriver from the Nushagak River. 2 hours upstream of the Nushagak River from a small city called Colliganic. So right there is Dillingham. Colliganic is way up there. Way up there. Now, this is a pretty big river, folks. Obviously, it gets smaller the further you go towards upstream. Dillingham, and then way up here. And then he went 2 hours further. Now, to say something is remote, in Alaska, it seems like most things are remote. Yeah, this was remote. So he cruises up, drops the hunters off at the camp that they made, and then tells them, yeah, I've got to go further up and meet another group. So he takes off and he goes further upriver. He was an assistant guide for a guide named David Duncan. Now, why do you become an assistant guide? Why not just become a guide? Because you have to have experience, you have to have a license, you have to have a bond, you have to go through some licensing procedure, and you have to delineate your experience. That's what he was trying to do. Now, when Murray didn't arrive at the next camp, David Duncan sounded the alarm. Now, unbeknownst to David, but just 10 minutes after Brian dropped off his customers and started back up the river, another guide sees Brian's boat slowly floating down the river with nobody in it. Boat was upright. Everything was fine. It was just adrift. Nobody on board. The other guy pulls up next to it, sees nobody's on board, thinks, well, maybe it was on shore and it washed away, and pulls it over. Now, the boat had the key turned on and the throttle in the open position. Alaska State Troopers had started already flying up there from Dillingham. They came up in a helicopter, and they also flew some private planes, and the word quickly got out that the planes that were being used to transport the hunters pretty far up river until they had to get in a boat, they started to assist on the search as well. What you find in Alaska is that everybody helps each other. Wouldn't that be nice to have a society that was like that? And why do you think it works up there? Because I think people realize that when things are really bad, you better count on your neighbor because no help's coming. Now, the Nushagak River, this is an interesting, I didn't know this, but when I did the research on the story, 50% of the world's salmon harvested come from the Nushagak River and the Bristol Bay region. Now, the type of fish that go up are coho, sockeye, chum, pink, and chinook. Dillingham is the largest city in this area, population only about 2,400 people. So Alaska State Troopers took over this search and they dispatched out of Dillingham by plane and helicopter. The planes they have these giant wheels on them and they're tail draggers, and they could land on the bank of a river. Same as a helicopter, but these big planes are designed for that short takeoff and landing. They also had a private helicopter from Tucker Aviation that volunteered their services. And then there were 3 private boats for other guides that were working the area that started searching for Brian as well. The boat search went on for 4 days. They found nothing. Plane search went on for 3 days. They found nothing. Troopers said that there was no evidence that Brian got off his boat and went ashore and then it drifted away. I can understand that. Boat's in an open position, ignition is on. If you're getting off, you're going to turn everything off. So really, let's think about this for a second. Point of separation. Brian drops off his hunters, gets out of sight for just 10 minutes. Did something happen that quick? What was that? So we're talking about a subclassification of the missing, hunters. It happened on water. No witnesses. And that 10-minute time span, something happened. Like I've said 100 times before, it's like something's watching, waiting for you to get out of sight, and bammo, it's going to happen. He's never found. No clothing, no shoes, no shirt, nothing is ever found floating in the water that is his. He's gone. Now some of you may say, well, yeah, water accidents happen. True. Boats get scuttled, boats get damaged, you hit something in the river, it sinks, it takes on water. Nothing like that happened. No. That's the reason that this story is intriguing to me. Also, that 10-minute gap. 10 minutes, that could have meant that he was 1 minute outside of you when it happened. And then another guide saw it floating down the river 9 minutes later. We don't know. So I'm just saying. So those are the 2 stories. Now, if you want to leave, you don't want to hear what I'm going to talk to you about, I understand. But I'm going to talk to you about interviews I've done. Interviews. I don't do a lot of interviews, as many of you know. Meaning I don't travel around the country doing every podcast in the world. Why? Because they're a wild card. Think about my movie American Sasquatch, Man, Myth, or Monster on Amazon. I interviewed many researchers for that movie. One thing I did before I interviewed them is I read the books that they wrote. Yes, I did. And I watched the movies if they were in one. Why? Because I wanted to know everything possible about them. It helps the interviews to have a deep dialogue about the person's work. I want to know something about them personally, a little bit about their life. And usually I'll ask them something personal because it brings the audience a little closer rather than talking just about work and the main reason that we're there with them. And I try not to lose sight of something really important. I'm interviewing them for a reason. There's something about their work I want you to hear. Now, when you're watching this, the first comment is usually a comment from me. It's the pinned comment. And in those comments, more times than not, I will leave a couple categories of these videos I've done. Missing Canadians, missing truckers, etc. And I want you to go back and I want you to watch those if you haven't seen them. And most people usually just watch the video I've done as the latest, but they haven't really gone back and see what I've done in my past. Now there's a section there of interviews I've done with people. Oh, I've interviewed a lot of people. And really, right before I go into that interview, I've said this to you guys before, but I'll say it again. My mom, I wasn't that young. I was probably in high school. She said, Dave, there's something you need to remember in life. You have 2 ears and 1 mouth. You should be listening twice as much as you're talking. One of those great, simple life lessons from Mom. And right before I go in to do an interview, I think about that. Except I really try to do it 3-1. You hear about me all the time. What do you want to hear about me again for? If I can add to the story that the person's telling, I'm gonna chime in. But really, I'm going to ask a question, and I'm going to shut up and listen to what they have to say. Now let's talk about George Knapp, Coast to Coast. George and I have done some absolutely phenomenal interviews. Not by my brilliance, by his. And why are they so good? Because George does his homework. But he's explained this to me before too, in our conversations over a meal. He does 1 to 2 interviews, maybe once or twice a month. He has the time to read a book, what the person wrote, do the homework about the person, watch their movies, and come into the interview extremely well prepared. And he does, which makes him a phenomenal host. On the other side of the coin, George Norrie. He interviews 2 to 3 people every day, 5 days a week. Almost no time, really, no time to read a book or prepare. And therein lies the difference. Do I blame George Norrie? Oh, heck no. George is doing the best he can with what he has. On that opposite end of the scale, it's just 2 different styles. If George Knapp had George Norrie's job, there's no way he could do the in-depth interview that he does. It'd be impossible. He's admitted this to me. Hosts that do a massive number of interviews have to rely on their producers to brief them and supply them with the notes to make the interview flow. That's why you have producers. You've got to rely on them. An audience can tell when an interview flows, when there's synergy to it, when you're really getting into the details. You can tell when a host isn't prepared. Understand, I'm not blaming any host at all. I am blessed that anyone wants to talk to me. I'm being serious. I blame the producer if the host flops, because they weren't given the notes to get him to succeed. If you want a great interview, you know your guest intimately. You come prepared. And that's really one of the reasons I don't do a lot of interviews, because I've done too many interviews where the hosts weren't prepared and it was uncomfortable. I don't want to sit there and do a monologue. That's boring too. Dialogue is what you want to hear as a listener. If I say something and I'm being interviewed and I say something and you're thinking something, I want the host to think that as well and ask the follow-up question. Hey, what did you mean by that? Or what was the next thing you did after that? Ask those tough questions. Now, trust me, folks, I'm no expert at interviewing anybody. But I think I'm a pretty good judge of what people want out of an interview. And everybody has a different style. Everybody does. Heck, I've sat in interviews before where I thought at the end of the interview I really wasn't wanted even there. And I walked away thinking, why did the host even have me there? It's happened in the past. Do I get mad? No. As I'm sitting there and I realize that we're failing, I do the best I can. But there's a fine line between being pushy, maybe to get a point across, and being just the nice guy that people like. It's a very fine line. I want to get out of every interview as being someone that the audience liked. So would I do more interviews with people I don't know? Oh, for sure. I'd give everybody one chance, at least. Now you're going to see an interview coming up with the Y-Files. I think that AJ, the host, was one of the most well-prepared hosts I've ever sat across from. The man knew more about me than just about anybody. The only other interview I've ever done that came close to that was George Knapp. And AJ watched the movies, read my books. The man he asked great questions, follow-up questions. Yeah. I'm hoping that you like that interview. And, you guys have said, well, would you do more interviews? For sure I would. Of course. And for me to travel cross-country or do something, it's got to be somebody I trust and somebody that has a history of really doing big interviews and knows how to talk to people. And there's a lot of people out there that do. So hopefully I'll get those invites. Hopefully you'll learn more over time about me. And I do encourage you to watch those 3 movies of mine on Tubi for free. And then go over to Amazon and get the follow-up from the most recent 2 movies. You are appreciated, as are the two hosts that I've sat with recently, AJ and Joe Rogan, thank you for having me on. It was greatly appreciated. Be kind. Kindness is free. Kindness goes a long way towards making life bearable. Paulides out.